You're listening to the Values and Leadership Podcast, where business leaders share their stories of purposeful impact and success.
Hello and welcome to the Values and Leadership Podcast, the podcast for innovative leaders who want to apply new ways of doing things in work and deploy their talents and time to earn their legacy every day. I am your host, Ahmed Arif. This episode is the production of Corpocure, a values-based leadership development advisory firm that unleashes possibilities for leaders in elevating their business and its people to their next best stage and have a purposeful impact in business and in life. Today, we have Dr. Zach Mercurio. Dr. Zach, he is a doctor. He has doctor in philosophy from Colorado University. He studied organizational learning, performance, and change. He studied organizational, strategic, and change management theory and practice. And he researches meaningful work, purpose, and fulfillment. Dr. Zach, he's specialized in purposeful leadership, meaningful work, positive organization researcher. He's a consultant, keynote speaker, an author, and affiliate professor. Welcome to the show, Dr. Zach.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Great. One interesting sentence you love to speak about is that you believe everyone is built for purpose, desires meaningfulness, and deserves dignity in work, school, and in life. And your work encompasses theory, research, and practice. So you have like all-rounded view that can be helpful for business. So I want to know what motivated you to be one of the pioneers in your work about meaning and purpose.
Well, it all emerged from me not experiencing those things, right? We all have a fundamental human need for purpose and meaning. A lot of people talk about purpose and meaningfulness, especially in business, as some sort of trend or the next big thing. But really, purpose and meaningfulness have been the next big thing for the last 2 centuries. You know, as long as humans have been humans, we've desired significance. You know, we've searched for meaningfulness. We've searched for purpose. And the same is true in work, where we spend 1/3 of our lives in which we're not sleeping, which is a key part of where we make meaning in life. And for me, I was educated for success. Success was told to me that it was getting a lot and achieving a lot, right? And I think most people in the world, especially here in the West, in the US, are educated for success, that if you acquire and achieve, then you'll be successful, right? So we live in this if-then argument. If I get to the weekend, then I'll be happy. If I get my nice retirement, then I'll be content or fulfilled. And I quickly learned the problem with living in this if-then argument, and the problem with being motivated by achievements is precisely the fact that you can achieve them. And then what? You know, I got my first job out of university and I was getting paid a good amount of money. I was working in advertising. On the outside, everybody thought I was successful, but on the inside, I felt empty, right? That search for meaning was not satisfied. And one of the reasons why is that all of the people I was working with in that organization was completely obsessed with what they got and what they achieved for what they did. And we never talked about why we did what we did. And it was at that moment where I remember I started thinking, is this what life is? Like, should we begrudgingly trudge through 1/3 of our lives that we're awake for to enjoy the other 1/3 of our lives that we're awake for? And if we do live like that, what will that do to our families, our societies, our world? And it just, I still can't shake the faulty logic in that. And it was since that realization that I've set out to want to change how people think about work, how they think about organizations, how they think about leadership, and starting with satisfying that fundamental human need to find purpose and meaning.
Wow.
So it came out of a story of not experiencing it, which I think a lot of our work, people who are in our field, that's a very common experience.
Great, great. So this self-realization that you reached, when did you reach it? After how many years?
Yeah, for me, I'm lucky. I had an early life crisis, which I
Mm.
recommend to anybody. I was a couple of years into my career, and I was just getting that lack of meaningfulness was really eroding my sense of self. And what happened actually is I met a cab driver,
Mm.
and the cab driver, we were just making small talk. And he asked me, how am I doing? And I said, oh man, is it almost the weekend yet? And I just grumbled that, right? Because I'd heard other people grumble that.
Mm.
And it was Tuesday at the time. And then I asked him how he was doing. And I remember he talked so passionately about all of the passengers he had picked up that day. He talked about being people's friends they don't talk to, their parents they don't talk to. He was really excited about his work as a cab driver. And I realized, like, in that moment, that his perspective was rooted in what he
Mm.
got to give through what he did instead of what he got through what he did. And I
Mm.
really became obsessed with, how do we learn that perspective? And how do we create environments where people can focus on what they give through what they do versus what they get through what they do? And it was about 2 years in, and ever since I met that cab driver who was a purposeful person, my life trajectory has been completely changed, through researching and studying and teaching on how to build that perspective of purpose first.
Mm. So you had this self-realization after self-reflection of this incident with the taxi cab, of what he enjoys from giving, not from getting from his work. But some other people, they remain for years, maybe 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, maybe they even retire without getting this moment or this kind of reflection. What can be helpful for people to realize or to reach this kind of self-reflection? Is it honesty with themselves? Is it what can help?
Well, I think the questions we ask ourselves determine what we pay attention to. And what we pay attention to determines what we think about. And what we think about determines who we are. So, one of the things I might recommend to people is to consider the questions that you ask yourself. And we ask ourselves questions all the time, right? Like, you may get up this morning and ask yourself, what do I have to do today? Now, if you converted that voice in your head to a motivational speaker, that's a pretty demotivating question, right? Hey, let's get pumped up for the day. What do you have to do today? How are you going to get through the day? Right? But we do this to ourselves all the time. A couple years ago, I had that bad habit. I would wake up, look at my calendar and say, what do I have to do today? And I realized after studying purpose and our inherent need for purpose, that the better question was, how is what I'm going to do today going to impact others? The answer to that question is much different. It's meaning giving. Another question we ask is, what am I going to do with my life? A better question is, what do I want my life to do for others? There's a writer here in the US, he writes for the New York Times, David Brooks, and he wrote, the difference between a resume virtue, which is something that you acquire and achieve to increase your standing as you, and a eulogy virtue, the things you want people to say about you at your funeral. So today, are you pursuing resume virtues or are you pursuing eulogy virtues? And how much time do you spend on both? So these kinds of questions, just the questions we ask ourselves and interrupting that internal monologue that we have, can be really powerful. Because if you start making a habit of asking yourself legacy-oriented questions and questions that reaffirm that you matter and that you make an impact, it can be really powerful. And if you want to do this right now, today, whenever you're listening to this podcast, just think about the next person you're going to talk to and ask yourself, how can I use my strengths to positively impact the person I'm going to talk to next? And those questions can really change how we act and how we perceive the world.
Well, I like what you ended with, to start to ask yourself more legacy question. How can I use my strength to help the next person I'm going to meet. But this two questions is very powerful. I like them. But if people start to ask themselves this question, they will be in conflict with themselves. Why? Because as you mentioned in the beginning, we were taught that we have to be successful and we were taught to get things. So how can I find this kind of balance between the two?
Yeah. So every effect has a cause, right? I have a 6-year-old. He's in kindergarten right now. And he's learning this, right? That you can't get a result by trying to get a result, right? You can't get an effect without trying to pursue a cause. Any success, right, in business, whether that's profit, your profit only exists because you fill a need. You contribute in some way. Where I see businesses go wrong, or leaders in businesses go wrong, is they try to get profit or money by pursuing profit and money on their own. And that's always going to be a finite gain, right? You're going to be constantly chasing the next thing. Whereas purposeful people, purposeful organizations, purposeful leaders relentlessly pursue and focus on their contribution, their cause, the value they add to people's lives, and trust that the effect, the money will follow. So I think this comes to our lives too, as people, right? No organism, no living organism thrives without a purpose, right? Every living organism dies when it no longer contributes. The key is not in what we care about. Results are important. Having money to live is critical, but we have to remember that those are effects. Those are results. It's not why people need us. It's not the contribution that manifests those results. So it's a matter of emphasis too. Are you emphasizing the achievement or are you emphasizing the contribution? So I think these things are very much in balance. Like when I talk to companies, I often say it's not profit or purpose. It's profit because of purpose, so you can deliver more of your purpose.
Great. When you were speaking to those leaders in those companies and they have realized and discovered this message that you are telling them, that you can pursue both the profit and the purpose, what change have they done in their organization? What change have they done in themselves first and in their organization? What practice has changed? What shifted in their business model? How things went after this realization?
Yeah, I'll give you a very specific example. I was working with a very large company's sales division. And this is going to be a small example, but I'll share how manifests in a more large scale change. And the
Is it a listed company in stock exchange or on a small closed company?
This is a large publicly traded company. It's a large global telecom company.
Great.
I'm not going to name the names because you could deduce who it is. But there was a vice president for sales that brought me in, and after my talk around purpose and purposeful leadership, she said, Zach, this whole purpose stuff is nice, but what do I do when I just have to get my people's numbers up? Right? When I just have to get the quarterly numbers up. And I said, well, what do you typically do with your team when you need to get the numbers up? She said, well, I schedule a meeting and I tell them, hey, we need to get our numbers up. How are we going to do that? And I said, well, how does that typically work? And she said, well, people hate those meetings. They don't talk and they want to leave. And I said, okay, well, what if you went in next quarter, and you asked them, how can we contribute to our customer more to get the numbers up? And tell me what happens. So she went to her team and she said, she started with that. How can we contribute more to our customer to get the numbers up? And she said people stayed at the meeting for 3 hours brainstorming, right? Again, it goes back to that narrative. What do you emphasize? Nobody wants to do something because you tell them they have to do something, right? Nobody is compelled by a financial target. No kid is sitting on a playground somewhere saying, I can't wait to grow up and make a lot of earnings before income and tax, right? Or make a lot of profit.
True.
Right? I mean, those are the things that don't compel us as human beings. But solving problems for a real human being, a customer, that's compelling for human beings. And so it's a matter of emphasis. The goal was the same, to get numbers up. But the emphasis was different. How can we contribute more to get numbers up? The team started experiencing more meaning. They started talking more with one another. Creativity went up. And then here's the definition of success. They were working, it was a large telecom. They were working with a client, and the client asked them to come in and train them on building purpose into their culture as a sales team. So that feeling rubbed off, right? Yeah, that feeling that you get, and you probably experience it. You know those people who are really dedicated to their cause, their contribution. They're dedicated to you. They're serving you. You can feel that. And their client, who was buying a telecom service, actually ended up asking them to come in and say, what have you done? What have you done in the past 6 months? Like, our experiences with your salespeople have completely changed. And it's a matter of emphasis. Are we emphasizing our achievements, or emphasizing the contributions that will lead us to the achievements?
Great. So it was a simple question, but it had a trigger. It triggered behaviors in the meeting. It lasted for 3 hours, and it triggered behaviors after the meeting, and the feelings has been contagious even to the clients. So it becomes like a cycle.
Yeah. So why would you? Yeah. And for the company, it was, why would you go back? You know, for the people, it was like the goal was the same, but why would you go back to just thinking about, hey, let's have a meeting. How can we get the numbers up? Right. And I will say this, that I make it sound simple, but there's a couple things that leader did, that VP of sales did. One, she was honest. She was honest that this is not working. The second is that she was willing to change, right? She was willing to try something new. I mean, telecom, it was a high pressure, highly competitive environment, but she was willing to say, let me try something new to energize my people, right? And she was willing to try it. And that is something that can't be overlooked in these examples, that it took work. It took someone changing what they did. And they repeat this over and over and over again. And you have to get people to feel the difference when they focus on purpose, to enable that to take hold. And you mentioned contagious. We find in the research that emotions are contagious in organizations. It's called emotional contagion. So when people feel joy, gratitude, up to 3 degrees from them, so 3 people from them, they will experience and mirror that same emotion. So a good question for the audience is, what kind of emotions do you spread in your organization? And that's something that came up with this client, is that the way you show up, the emotions that you convey, and purpose elicits positive emotions, are the emotions that your organization will have. And that's an important lesson for leaders.
Yep. Actually, I was reading something about something called emotional charter. So teams can have a meeting and agree on the emotions that they want to express. So this is what we were just mentioning about.
I like that.
Yeah, emotional charter. Yeah, it should be a meeting, and you decide on like 3 or 4 emotions that you like to experience, and 3 or 4 emotions that you don't like to experience. Then, if those emotions that you don't like to experience, when it comes, how can you deal with them, and what is the consequences if it lasts like this, so that they start to have this kind of conversation and have a team charter about the emotions. So it's very influential. Yeah, I like that you bring it up.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think when we think about emotions too, it's responding instead of reacting. So what I find is that purposeful organizations and teams, they're very good at creating the space between what's happening and their response. Because oftentimes teams just react, right? For example, you didn't meet a number, let's react to the number. And instead, pausing, being able to make sure that you're doing something or asking a question that elicits a positive emotion before you respond, because otherwise we tend to be worse problem solvers. We tend to be worse at collaborating when we're in a negative emotional state. So we can drive ourselves into these negative spirals without creating that space. So I like that charter idea.
Let's be fair to ourselves. So for myself, I have been into business schools, and I have been trained about management, about economics, about microeconomics, and all of these things. And I didn't learn about emotional intelligence in work. I didn't learn about purpose. I didn't learn about meaning. So all of us, actually, we are suffering from this kind of learning that's prevalent in the business schools. And this kind of purpose and meaning, it is there in the philosophical debates and discussions out there. Only few people are talking them. And we as graduate of business schools or graduate of engineering, we are not used to this kind of talks, and we think that this kind of talks is not appropriate to be in the workplace.
Right.
So, so in this kind of sense, when you introduce this kind of purpose and meaning into the business context, what's the best way you found that business leader can be accepting this? So, do you link meaning and purpose into business results, or you link it to what?
Well, I try to start with the basic truths we know about the human brain. That just because you clock in somewhere doesn't you cannot shut off the meaning making structure in your brain. So you know, and so here's what has happened. If I could just go back to why we teach management like we teach management. And it really goes back to the Industrial Revolution, where we went from a period where all work was purposeful to an assembly line system where people only worked on small parts of a product and never got to see the impact of their work, right? So all of a sudden, there was this split. We started divorcing this idea of impact and purpose from work and started over focusing on productivity. But let's go like pre-second industrial revolution, right? So think about this. All work was inherently purposeful. So for example, I farmed the land to feed my community. I was a shoemaker to give my neighbor shoes, right? But what happened is when we slowly started ripping people away from being able to see the end impact of their work, that's when we started separating this idea of work from this idea of purpose and meaning. I think right now, what we're trying to do is the reason why we learn what we learn in management schools, because we've been in a productivity age for a long time. But I think now our interconnectedness is moving us back to a purposeful age where people are yearning for that inherent need to see how their work and how they actually matter. And I think companies are realizing that when they do that, when people believe that their work matters and that they matter, that the results follow, right? It's incredibly easy for nothing to matter to someone who doesn't believe that they matter. So, I mean, I do a lot of work with manufacturing. So on a factory line, right? One of the biggest issues is an issue called inertia, right? When I go and walk a factory line and I ask people, why are you doing this? They tell me because my line supervisor told me to. Have you ever been productive because someone told you to be productive? Have you ever been productive while you were in a state of fear or guilt or economic pressure? No, right? So instead, like just simply starting to show people on that factory line what they make possible, the end product, the customer story, that their craft means something again. That's what I mean by being purposeful. I don't see, and to be honest with you, I don't see how it could not be appropriate in the work setting, because it's the only reason why we work in the first place, which is to add value. We wouldn't have companies, we wouldn't have profit, we wouldn't have financial figures to argue over if we didn't create value for human beings.
Great. I like when you linking the work with the impact.
Yeah.
And even the work with the impact can be easily connected to the productivity, so you can make it a seamless thing.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing is we separate, like, think about the things you do in your everyday life that you're really motivated to do. I mean, have you ever been really motivated to do something because someone told you to do it? Right? No, I mean,
no, you don't like that.
We don't. We don't like that. So to think that all of a sudden the essence of what it means to be human would magically transform because someone's in the workplace is the biggest problem with management thinking right now. People are people wherever they go. And the organizations that treat people as whole people where they are, they know about these psychological practices of motivating people. I think those are the ones that are going to be longer term, have longer term success, because if you have high performance standards and you have high goals for profit and productivity in an environment that doesn't maintain the energy to meet those goals, that's a recipe for workplace misery.
Well, the best thing to end with is the invisible leader. Why do you call it the leader invisible?
Yeah, when you look at organizations who are incredibly harmonized, and you look at leaders and you look at teams who manage themselves, there's this whole notion of self-managed teams out there.
Yes.
And what we find is that it's not so much a person is the most compelling influencer of behaviors, but it's a common purpose, a commonly believed purpose that's the invisible thread between two people. Like you and I on this podcast, there is an invisible force that we are beholden to, right? You and I have a common purpose, and that influences this conversation right now.
Yes.
So the invisible leader is the common purpose. And when leaders can put the purpose above themselves, that's where the magic happens. I often say that a leader's primary role should be to make real and consistently ensure a clear line of sight to a common, compelling purpose that inspires people to look beyond themselves. So one of the most powerful concepts in psychology is this concept of self-transcendence, when the object of your behavior is something outside of yourself. And that's what gives life meaning. That's what gives work meaning. And it exerts a pulling force and constantly pulls us forward and pulls us through difficult circumstances. When you only rely on results for motivation or pay or things like that, you're just pushing people for the short term. But purpose, common purpose, the invisible leader, is that force that constantly keeps pulling you forward and harmonizes energy in an organization.
Very powerful what you mentioned, because now we shifted from business and its results and its profits and its activities and all of these things into something which is invisible, something which is common purpose. We are talking about things that's intangible. So suddenly we are talking about business people looking to do intangible things, trying to achieve. This is a huge shift in mindset, a huge shift in behaviors, a huge shift in everything. So it's very powerful concept.
Now here's the I'll put a caveat for those people who love to measure things. You can measure this. I mean, you can measure impact. I mean, you can measure your ability to deliver value, right? If you see your financial indicators as indicators of your value that you're providing, the purpose that you have, I think it's really powerful. Peter Drucker once said, often quoted in MBA school and business school, he once said, the profit is not the purpose of a business. It's the test of that purpose's validity. So profit, your indicators should be a test of how much value you're providing your people and people around you. And again, it's a question of emphasis. It's not a question of either or. I think they're both important. You can't have, I use the profit example, but you can't have a company delivering purpose if you don't have profit. I've seen people go the other way where they're all purpose driven and they don't know how to run a business, and then they have no money to deliver their purpose, right? That's not what I'm going for. Some people make criticisms and say, you need to run a business. I agree with that. It's what you emphasize that matters.
Great. Really great, Dr. Zach. It's a really nice conversation with you.
Yeah, you too.
Great. Really, I like it very much. Thank you for your time. Thanks for the insights. And if you'd like to say a winding message to the listeners, you can.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having these types of conversations. And I think it goes back to that big question, right? Is what kind of legacy are you leaving today for the people around you? What do you want them to say about you? And as a company, how will the world be better because you existed? And if people can answer those questions, I think that we'll have better businesses, more profitable businesses, and just more success in general.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Zach. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks a lot.